how did you get started with all
right,
this?
I'm going to break down Terrence Howard, okay? Everybody thinks he's crazy, and I can understand why. Look, I can understand why, because he sounds real far out there, and everybody else is like down here on Earth. He seems like a space cadet, okay? But the thing is, he's thinking outside the box. He has a real hard time explaining it in a simple term to lay terms. He has problems simplifying it, okay? But I'm going to translate for him because people are calling him crazy and all this, and it sounds like it. It really does. But he's actually onto something real. It's something I've been trying to explain with conservation of energy and what happens before the singularity, okay? It ties to the thermodynamics, how scientists are actually throwing out thermodynamics, conservation of energy. You can't do that when it comes to the universe, okay? And with gravity, I'm going to simplify gravity, what he's talking about. I'm going to simplify these linchpins and the geometry that he's talking about. Now, it seems like he's crazy, but he's not. And I'll use this whiteboard over here to explain it in a real simple way. And it'll make sense, and you'll understand, oh, okay, now I know what he's saying. Now, he is talking outside what right now that a physicist would think or want to know or yada, yada, yada. And he's talking about numbers too. So he's like, the numbers are pretty much pointless. You have to understand the fundamentals of it. And I explain that all the time, okay? It's not that we don't need the numbers. We need the numbers to replicate it. But to understand the fundamental framework of it, we need a fundamental backbone. If we don't have that, you have paradoxes and numbers that you don't know where they go and holes, okay? So whenever you're looking at it in a numerical fashion, it can help us replicate the information. But to understand it, we have to understand it in a fundamental way. And then once we understand the fundamental backbone, we can put the numbers where they go, okay? So there's a lot in this that it's hard to take in that our common knowledge people don't want to accept, or they're having a hard time to accept because they can't understand. But there is a fundamental thing that everyone's missing, and the people in charge, like he's talking about, they keep us in this dumbed down kind of thinking inside the box and just passing around the same stuff over and over and over and over. It's like we're stagnant. And he mentions that, he touches on that too. The science is kind of like going stagnant. Or Joe mentions it, okay? He's like, that kind of means we're like a fundamental stop in science, you know, and they talk about that. If you watch some YouTube videos, if you look it up in some studies and all this, it seems like science is coming to a dead end, but it's not necessarily. It's just we're passing around the same stuff, reinventing the same stuff, reinventing the wheel. Look how long we've been making the same damn batteries, you know what I'm saying, without stepping outside in a new way of creating a battery. Yeah, lithium ion, we've been doing that for a while. Capacitors, best way to go with carbon and all that. We need to start doing that stuff, okay? But it's all reserve tech. It's stuff for like the military and the government and the high ups and stuff we just don't get. We're not privy to, and that keeps us in a stagnant kind of civilization. So I'm gonna touch on some of this stuff, and I'll help you make sense. I'll make it understand. Just listen.
Come into this world the way everybody else does, I don't think. I used to think that everybody had the similar experience, but like if I asked you, what was your first memory in life? What would it be?
I don't think I know.
My first memory was almost like when you're dreaming and you're falling and you hit the bottom and you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first memory, but I didn't wake up here. I was inside my mother's womb. And I was about maybe 6 months inside the womb.
All right, so right here, I have a vague memory of being born, okay? But the only thing I remember is a bunch of trauma. It sucked. That's all I remember. And I believe that's a repressed thing that people repress because it's traumatic. And it's an old brain. It's from our early childhood. It's not an old brain. It's a brand new brain, but it's starting to receive information, the light. And as soon as it starts receiving information and feeling things and all of this that it hasn't felt before, then you're getting a whole bunch of synapse coming in. It's like a whole bunch of information at one time, and it's tragic. It's traumatic. It's just a lot to take in when you're a baby and you're being born, and then your body is freezing all of a sudden, and you're seeing all this light, and your brain is reacting to that light because your eyeballs are reacting to it. And I'll touch on that. While the Greeks actually thought that we emitted light beams out of our eyes. That's kind of true. It has to do with the living brain, but I'll touch on that here in a little bit when he gets to it. But there's truths that we're kind of not being told, that it's understanding things in a fundamental way.
And I'm like, okay, don't forget I'm here. Okay. Don't forget. You go to sleep. Wake up again. Now something's moving in front of you. And you're like, oh, that's my friend. But I had a different name for it. I didn't know it was my hand. But I knew I had a title for it. Go back to sleep. All of those things. Then ultimately you get ready
to reiterate, to elaborate, my bad. I think he's getting being born mixed up with being in the womb. That's what I believe. Because you can't see in there. You haven't had any visual conception yet. You haven't had any physical conception except for just the 98.6 degrees of your mom, which you're a little bit warmer because you're at the pit or the core, and the core pit is always hotter than the surrounding areas. That's a potential difference. I'll get to that. If I can remember, there's a lot to cover in this.
Come out. I remember all of that.
You remember coming out?
Remember being compressed, you know, and you want to panic, but you're flooded with like some serotonin and dopamine to where you feel relaxed. You go right back to sleep.
But I didn't go to sleep. I had a umbilical cord wrapped around my neck.
I remember the whole nine, and the proof of it was when my wife Mira, that you just met, when she was 6 months pregnant with my son Kieran, I wanted to prove to her what I was talking about. So I put a light on her stomach every day at 6 o'clock at night. And I would move that light back and forth, and I'd put a song on for a week straight. On Saturday, after a week, I didn't put the light there, and I didn't do the music. And he pushed up on her stomach.
See, I don't know if a baby can actually, I don't know if the light is going to travel through the mother's skin membranes, okay? And I don't know if the sound is going to be able to reach into the womb. But there is a fluid in there, amniotic fluid, and sound travels faster through liquids. And the denser it is, the faster the sound travels and the easier it is. So there's a possibility that the stimulus that the baby is getting is received from the mother and the baby reacts somehow, okay? Or the sound can penetrate through the membrane, it can vibrate into the water, and it can vibrate into the ears of the baby because the babies are sitting there in the amniotic fluid. So this is kind of a gray area, but it's not unlikely or impossible or crazy. There are physics here that we probably haven't even touched on or even gotten around to or care about that he's trying to explain, but people think, oh, that's crazy. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not trying to be an ass. I'm trying to translate for him because there's a lot of truth here.
And then when I put the light there, he started following the light. And for the next 2 months, we did this every night, and he would go all the way around her belly, back and forth, always pushing on it. You know, I didn't understand at the time that maybe I've interfered with the development process, and maybe he's wrapped the cord around his neck. I shouldn't have done all of this, but it came out wonderful and fine. And this little boy, first thing he wanted to do is see light. He loved lights from that early stage.
I'm obsessed with the light.
I asked him the square root of 2, the square root of 5, the square root of that, the square root of pi, and he will run it off. But he's just like, his personality is like Forrest Gump, you know, to where he's just loving and wants everybody to be around him and care. But for me, that's where it started, in there. And then when I was about 5 years old, I had another dream. And the room filled up with like this fluid, a dark fluid. And I could see the
Bose-Einstein condensate
of it moving around.
I'm just going to throw this out here real quick. Bose-Einstein condensate and this dark fluid, it's because a Bose-Einstein condensate is clear, just like gas is clear, okay? And it's when this fluid, this superfluid, this cold cryogenic superfluid is condensed into a ball. Basically, you have a black hole. And it's black because it's clear. And black holes slow down light. And when you have one that big, it can stop light, okay? And they're about negative 459.67 degrees, close to absolute zero, okay? So a Bose-Einstein condensate is a quantum mechanical superfluid, which is also a black hole, but it's the size of a gigantic star, okay? It's like superfluid helium-4. It depends on the mass of the black hole, but it's either deuterium superfluid helium-4, it's superfluid deuterium, okay? Which is a supermassive black hole. And then there's just larger black holes, which are kind of like a medium, and then you have small, but you have stellar mass, and it just depends on the size. And you have superfluid helium-4 is a massive black holes, and then you have supermassive black holes, which are deuterium, but they're quantum mechanical superfluids. They're Bose-Einstein condensate. That's what a black hole is, okay? It does kind of use gravity, but gravity is technically a force of electrostatic, and I'll get to that when he starts talking about it.
And there was a being there. And I remember being walked through that fluid with him. And I was trying to look up at him, and I couldn't turn my head to look at him. And he had his hand straight. I knew his voice, but I did not know who it was, but I felt confident and comfortable. And as we moved along this dark blue fluid path with like chartreuse covering you know how when you look into a pool and you see the ripples, and if you're at the bottom of the pool, you see the ripples overlapping. That's what it looked like. And then when we got to the end
wave duality.
he said to me, if you could have anything in the world,
the water is a liquid universe.
Now, we were really poor. My dad had just gotten out of prison, for manslaughter. I didn't have much,
I didn't know that.
but I said to him, I want to know how everything works. And at that moment, he used his left hand and he opened up the door. And there was this mansion, big brown doors. And inside
a revelation
of it was this
in a
crystalline
nutshell.
flowers.
He's not
big
a nut
crystalline
job.
flowers, like a giant, like 5 feet across. And every time I tried to see his face, he would reach in and hand me another shape. And I was so fascinated with the shapes because they didn't look like the platonic solids. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. And he would hand me these shapes, and each shape was different and amazing. And I woke up from that dream. But after that moment, anytime something strange would happen in a dream, I had the powers of inception. Anytime something, I would be
Inception
naked in school,
is to create or bring
I would
something
say,
into existence.
I'm not naked. I must be dreaming. And immediately, I would run out of the school or run out of wherever I was, and I would find that mansion again. And I had access to all the knowledge. The proof of it is the 97 patents that I have now. The proof of it is the industries that I've innovated. It's like waking up, having a dream that you have a diamond in your hand, and out of nowhere, you wake up.
I'm just going to say that they say, well, anybody can patent anything. And I've seen this on some videos. Oh, anybody can patent anything. I can have patents on this and that, da-da-da-da-da. What he's saying is when you look at the patents and what he's talking about in it and how it could actually be viable in the society, you can see for yourself that he's actually onto something. But it's hard to actually comprehend and wrap your mind around because he's thinking so far out there and complex. He's having a hard time trying to simplify it in lay terms. And he does, but you still got to be far out there enough to grab his hand to be able to translate that and grab the hand of somebody that's on the planet. You know what I'm saying? Because he's like far out there. You need a mediator. And that's what I'm here to try to attempt, okay? And I'm still not saying that everybody's going to catch on, but I can guarantee that I can simplify what he's saying so you can actually grasp what he's touching on.
Hoping you're holding it, and you try and hold it, and it's gone when you wake up. But the proof is all the stuff that I've been able to do now.
So all these thoughts are from the time you were a baby. These are not things that you've learned. These are things that you had in your mind from the time you were born.
From before that time, because I remembered that I had been someplace else before. Now, what's interesting, that voice that I heard, that's my voice now.
I'm just going to also say this. I remember being, I think it was 4 months old. My bad. Okay. I had this picture taken. It was just a baby picture. Okay. But I remember this shirt that I had on, and I had this rabbit on it. He was a jogging rabbit. He was a rabbit that was jogging, and it scared me. Okay. And I was crying and crying and crying because it scared me because it was on my shirt. I remember this because it sucked because this thing scared the crap out of me. Because there's this rabbit on my shirt that was on me and I couldn't get it off. And I was just a baby. All I could think of was this thing that was scaring me. That's all I could think of. And my mom said I was unhappy all day. All I did was cry and whine. It was so hard to get that smile out of me out of that picture because I remember that. That was the first time I'd ever seen an escalator. I didn't know what it was. I just saw that there was this thing that was just, people were standing on and they were just going up. And I was a baby. And people think you don't remember that kind of stuff. I remember this stuff because I can talk about it to my mom. And she's like, I don't know how you even remember that because I remember it. It was traumatic. It was sticking with me. I didn't suppress that. I didn't repress that memory.
So it was like
so trauma can be retained in an infant's brain.
Was leading me through and periodically would show up again in other dreams. And I went off and became an actor because my mother wanted my little brother to be an actor. And I thought if I became an actor, I would get my mother's affection.
You get the money to be able to open the minds.
It wasn't until my mother was dying.
For sure.
And I'm talking to her. And she told me the reason that she was babying Antonio was because he had asthma. And my father always questioned whether it was his son or not because he looked so much like her family and didn't look so much like him. And I realized, my God, if I had followed my proper course, I could have saved my mother because the knowledge that I had, I had the grand unified field equation. I had already put that together. And at 7...
The thing is about this equation is it can vary It can vary, okay? But it depends on what perspectives of the puzzle pieces that we have now. Now, we have all these puzzles just laying around, all these puzzle pieces just laying around, okay? We don't know where a lot of this stuff goes. But the fundamental framework he's talking about is this equation is many actual equations, but it's the same thing, okay? We just take different aspects that we have. Like we have 5 puzzle pieces, okay, that can explain this. And we have 5 puzzle pieces that can explain it that are different, 5 different pieces. You see what I'm saying? You have the same theory that can be explained with 5 pieces, but the 5 pieces that explain this theory and the 5 pieces that explain this theory in our science are 5 different pieces altogether. You see what I'm saying? But they explain the same thing. And that means the equation itself can vary depending on what aspects of the science that we're looking at. You see what I mean? It's hard to really dive into. It really is, but it's not at the same time.
Hey, I was working with these things, and then I went through all of the hell that I had to go through. Being accused of domestic violence, all of those things. And I thought it was a curse at the time, but it was really removing me from advancing down the wrong path. And during that period of time, I started waking up in my dreams again. And I start going back into that palace.
I've only been able to lucid dream about 2 or 3 times in my life.
All of these things, and I started packing them. As I moved along, I got in touch with Michael Hudak. He was the president of the University of Science and Philosophy, because I was studying a guy named John Keeley, who had worked with frequency back in 1870s, had built the first what do they call it? Self-sustaining engine. Back in 1872, but he wouldn't tell people how he built it. And I was watching a program with Del Pons.
It's over Unity, basically.
And somebody in the audience said, doesn't John Keeley's work remind you a lot of Walter Russell? And a bell went on. And so I got in touch with the University of Science and Philosophy after watching some stuff about Walter Russell. And,
I'm not aware of it.
And Michael Hudak,
I could probably explain a little bit more if I do read some of his stuff.
And started talking to me, but he was more into the philosophy and the love that Walter was talking about.
Philosophical physics.
But my intention was to rebuild the periodic table.
See, the thing is about physics is you have to have letters, which represent the fundamentals, and then you have the numbers. The scientists elaborate way too much on the numbers whenever you come to a physical universe that is huge. You have like 10 to the 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. The numbers are negligible. It's pointless to get in the numbers that big. Give me the name of the number instead of the number of the name. You say octillion or sextillion, or that'll give me a conceptual idea of how many zeros I'm dealing with instead of just looking at a whole ton of zeros. You see what I mean? So give me the name of the number and not the number of the name.
I built a new periodic table because the stuff I had learned in college, I went to school for chemical engineering the first year over at Pratt. And they, at the time, I think it was like 108 elements. And I told the teacher, the professor, about the relationship between hydrogen on the spectrometer and carbon and silicon and cobalt. And it was like, it's the same exact color, same tone, just doubled in each octave. And he was like, no, each element is the same element and it will always be that element. And I was like, you don't see the relationship. So I left school and I was going to spend 40 years rebuilding the periodic table. And I found out that Walter Russell had already did that.
I'm just going to say this, that sound progenites light through sonoluminescence, okay? And the void, space roar, just the radio static of space itself is loud. There's a radio echo of the gigantic cave with no walls that is space, okay? And that static radio frequency permeates the void, okay? And that will usher in light, which will end up creating matter, okay? But it has to be, it comes from cold. All hot exists in something colder, which is a potential difference. That's the spatial area around it. It's always colder than the hottest thing. So if I take a lighter and if I light a cigarette lighter, okay, the flame is obviously going to be hotter than the surrounding area. And that's its potential difference. Now, if everything's in thermal equilibrium and I try to light that, let's say it's 400 or 500 degrees in the atmosphere, and I try to light a lighter that's 400 or 500 degrees, it's not going to light. It won't burn because there's no potential difference. Everything's in equilibrium, okay? So
And he did it based upon the natural curvature of everything.
And when you say rebuild the periodic table, what do you mean specifically?
Oh, and what he's talking about here is, okay, so you can take hydrogen, helium, and fuse those together and get lithium, okay? That's 1, 2 equals 3, okay? So you fuse 2 1s together, you get 2, which is a helium, okay? So it takes 2 light gases to make a light metal, okay? And we can, and metals and crystalline structure are different, but it depends on the amount of metal that you use and gas that you use to make a crystal. You see what I'm saying? And all right, let me just touch on this.